Oi?
No ideal a gente teria uma...
O quê?
O seu negócio.
Ué, tava aqui.
O meu não tem.
É privilégio meu?
Eu não
Acho que
tenho.
não, gente. Ali, ó, tem um da Suelen ali.
O quê?
Não tem um aqui,
Eu não tenho
Matheus?
o meu. Eu não tenho.
O seu, não?
Não.
Acho que eu vou segurar.
Ah. É.
A gente só sinaliza.
Outro.
Yes.
Oi?
Não, ok. O que é aconteceu? Eles vão trazer.
Até porque eu sou a primeira, eu tinha 40 minutos.
Ai, já fica se ofendendo.
Hã?
Fica se ofendendo.
There's only.
Oh, it's two, actually.
How this
But
moves?
I'm the opening one. I can give it to you. Oh, but you're the second one. You should be where?
Yeah,
Can I
it's
just go
all
under
of
the
us,
table?
two,
Okay,
two,
sure.
two.
Because we can share them, but the
No, but I
the
think
first.
it's better if we have each one. So
Yeah, but I don't think there's an
Do
extra.
you hear something now?
I
Just put
think
them
we
on.
have enough.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Is the level okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, let me out, please.
Sorry. No, you're not for it. You're doing the show.
Yes!
Okay. How do we know when to start?
So they will speak to you and they will make a sign.
Okay.
Okay. Good. So yes. A música que tá tocando é bem boa, inclusive.
Sério? Essa música?
Achei ótimo.
Não gostei. Well, today I didn't have breakfast. I was late. Is this enough or should I talking? Okay. So I was late, so I went to Knockoff and bought something and ate it in class. It was a really bad sandwich. It was cheap, but it was a sandwich. And vegetarian. Yep. Okay.
Oh, hi. I only had coffee, pure and black, with sugar, and nothing to eat.
Okay. Partiu, né, galera?
Merda!
Hi, we are Rise and Resist, initiative from Brazilians against fascism, trying to explain the current political situation in Brazil. None of the participants are historians, sociologists, or have studied political science. We're just trying to share what we know from our perspective. We will have 4 different blocks. Between every block, we will play some song related to the theme, and we will make available a list with Brazilian music on Spotify. We will be promoting also an open roundtable for talking and discussing actions against fascism in Den Laden on the 7th of November at 7. This is an open invitation for everyone who wants to join us.
Yes! Bora lá, time!
Yeah, isso é uma ótima voz pra rádio.
Turu, turu,
Nossa, essa música
turu.
ficou muito na minha cabeça.
We have a total of 0.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I ate like some muesli with yogurt and coffee and perhaps toast. Pretty much that's it. Yeah, it was a cool day. I had like this lesson on some programming stuff and music and yeah, cool.
I had bread and butter and coffee for breakfast. I was in Berlin. I came to Weimar during noon time. Um, well, I took the train, and then after that, I came to Weimar, and then
Quando for minha
I
vez,
don't know if I should
quando
keep
for
on
minha vez eu te
talking,
passo.
but
Okay.
yeah,
Tá
test 1, 2, 3, 4.
Ele chega aqui?
Can I trigger the background
Ele
music so
chega
we
aqui.
can check
Não,
the
aí eu tiro da
level?
tomada.
Não temos tempo de temer a morte.
Eu sou depois do Matheus, né?
Oi?
Eu sou depois do Matheus.
Você depois, Matheus.
Ok.
Eu tenho aqui a programação.
Ah,
Agora vai ser o meu, então eu não vou
beleza.
falar. Mas depois eu vou deixar aqui. Aí você pode
Vou ficar com
orientar.
uma orelha de fora pra ouvir vocês.
Então, eu vou fazer isso também, então. Mas, é isso. Olha, eu...
Eu tô gravando, mas eu acho que não vai dar pra... O pessoal não vai... O celular não vai ouvir o que vocês estão falando, que é muito baixo.
It's fine?
É verdade.
Okay,
Ok.
perfect.
Tá bom.
Yeah, genau.
Temos tempo de temer a morte.
Eu achei ótimo esse começo com o Dino maravilhoso.
É.
Eu acho que foi muito mais adequado do
Mais
que...
suave do que chegar.
É,
Toda vez.
mas eu acho que fechar com gasolina seria top. Se a
Eu
gente não
acho que
estourar
é.
nosso tempo, seria...
Eu acho que pouco provável, né?
Não, pouco provável, mas seria lindo.
Seria.
Quem sabe eles ficam emocionados e deixam a gente
Engraçado.
também emocionados. Porque assim, eles sempre colocam uma música entre blocos de qualquer forma, né? Poderia ser, né?
Deixa eu...
Tá chegando no final. Tá, eu vou colocar o timer, depois eu vou passar... Matheus, você vai querer ficar com o timer?
1 minute.
Matheus, você vai querer ficar com um timer pra você ficar de olho ou você quer que alguém, tipo, fique e te avise quando você estiver chegando em algum tempo?
Eu
Pode
acho que é
ficar
bom.
com o timer.
Outra pessoa com timer.
Tá bom,
Bota aqui depois.
tá bom.
Podia ter feito essa live no Facebook, foi vacilo.
Tá onde?
Bicha
Não,
preta
no
bem
YouTube.
antes, né?
Ah, tá no YouTube. Acho que bicha preta é próxima.
E depois eu...
Ok.
Okay, so this was Gal Costa with Divino Maravilhoso, and my name is Sara. I'm responsible for the timeline block. In this block, I will try to give a general historical contextualization from Brazil in order to help the current events be more understandable. It will be quick and oversimplified. I'm gonna run through it. So we're starting in 1960s when Jânio Quadros, a very strange figure, was elected. His campaign is famously known for its jingle where Jânio proclaimed that if elected, he would sweep away all corruption from Congress with a broom. Proclaimed that if elected, he would sweep away all corruption from Congress with a broom. He mostly swept himself out because he renounced in 1961, so after roughly 7 months being a president. This initiated the very conflictuous government of the vice president, João Goulart. João Goulart, also known as Jango, could only assume the presidency after a lot of resistance. The thing about Jango was that he was perceived by some, and especially the military, as a communist threat. This was during the Cold War, so tensions were very high. Tensions evolved into conflicts that marked a troublesome government that ended forcefully on the 31st of March of 64. On this day, there was a military coup that deposed Jango from his role as president. This is known as the Coup of 64, and is when the military dictatorship was installed in Brazil. It obtained support from part of the population by claiming to be a brief, protective, and necessary intervention against communism, inflation, corruption, disrespect of good ethics, moral, and the general malfunctioning of the country. This can be noted by the series of public and religious and anti-communist manifestation known as the March of Family with God for Liberty. The claimed temporary intervention imposed a state of exception, suspending the rights of everyone opposing the government and installing a regime that lasted for 21 years, from 64 to 85. We initiated a period of authoritarian, nationalist, anti-communist regime led by the military. The dictatorship was marked for its institutional acts. Powerful norms declared and imposed over legislation, even the Constitution, and was used as a way to legitimize government acts such as abuse of power. The most infamous was AI 5, issued on 68. The AI 5 allowed the president to revoke mandates, suspend Congress and all elections, and annul political rights of any person who opposed the government. Through this act, the censorship of political criticism, even by the press, was heavily installed, together with the institutionalization of torture and killing of anyone considered subversive by the ruling president. Simultaneously, the heavy investment and growth of industry generated what we call the economic miracle. It was a moment of fast economical growth that sadly was strongly concentrated and widening the gap wealth between distribution in country, from the poor to the richers. The miracle didn't last long before the speculative bubble popped in the crash of 71. The coming years brought a big external debt and high inflation, unemployment, and started a period of economic recession. Without the joy of economical miracle and the intense repression, the institutionalized violence and persecution, the population became more and more distressed. Eventually, the regime started open, preparing for its own end. In 79, the law of amnesty was proclaimed, granting amnesty to all those involved with political and electoral crimes from 61 to 79 during the military dictatorship. This means that those condemned by the military dictatorship were granted amnesty, so they were forgiven. But also that also means that those who acted upon and of favor and in the name of dictatorship were also granted amnesty. In 83, a proposition for constitutional amendment for direct elections was submitted for approval, and Direta Já was born. Direta Já, meaning direct now, was a civil movement that promoted a series of public demonstrations demanding the right for direct elections for president. The amendment for direct elections was not approved at the time. Yet, in 84, indirect elections were made, and in 85, a civilian was elected for president for the first time in 21 years after the military. Sadly, the indirect elected president never actually got to be president. He died just before he was able to assume the role, and the vice president, Sarney, became the president. In 89, we finally had the right to vote directly for a president of our country. This was only 29 years ago, so it is quite recent. It hasn't been long at all. We elected Fernando Collor, and he became president in 1990. It became public that Fernando Collor was actually involved with corruption. So in 92, he was impeached only after 2 years of president, and his vice Itamar Franco assumed the office. Fernando Henrique Cardoso, or FHC, was a minister of finance during this period of Itamar Franco as president. And FHC became very famous for elaborating and implementing the Plano Real, an economical plan that stabilized Brazil's economy at that time. It was going through some harsh times. After the success of his financial plan, FHC won the elections for president in 94. And then, once again, in 98, being re-elected for president. In 2002, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, from the Workers' Party, a leftist party, won his first election. Lula is very famous, and he invested a lot in social programs, such as Bolsa Família and ProUni, and was re-elected in 2006, and finished his term in 2010 with a record approval rating of 80%, which is quite a lot for a president. In 2011, Dilma, also from the Workers' Party, was elected with the support of Lula during her campaign. In 2013, the streets were filled with people, a lot of protests were made. Initially, protests against the increasing price of public transportation and against Brazil hosting the World Cup, and eventually becoming a general manifestation of insatisfaction toward corruption. Dilma is re-elected in 2014 after an intense polarized election. During this year began the investigation of the biggest corruption scandal in the country, known as Operation Car Wash. And there's a growing sense of political disillusion and insatisfaction of the population. In the end of 2015, a petition for impeachment of Dilma for administrative misconduct was submitted for the Chamber of Deputies in a process that divided the nation. Part of the population supported the impeachment for associating the Workers' Party with corruption. The other part believes it was a coup. Personally, I'm pretty sure it was a coup. But keep on going. Several people protest against the Workers' Party and Dilma, demanding an impeachment in order to end corruption. In 2016, the petition is approved by Eduardo Cunha. Michel Temer, formerly the vice president, takes office. Not long after, Eduardo Cunha, who approved the petition, is arrested for corruption himself. Today, Michel Temer, the current president in action, is investigated for corruption and obstruction of investigation and has a record of low approval ratings around 4%, which is very low. Brazil is currently in an election period, and the second round determining who will be the next president will happen in 2008. Oh, sorry. In the 28, yes.
28th
of October, next Sunday. During the dictatorship, well, this is the end basically of the timeline, and I just wanted to add a quick parallel due to some really recent events. During the dictatorship, there was a saying, Brazil, love it or leave it. Yesterday, Bolsonaro, the president candidate with majority of votes, known for being open with racist, sexist, homophobic comments, released a video, a 10-minute video. He says how he will corner the left and the ones who wear red into the shores because once he is elected, they must either flee overseas or they will go to jail, and they will rot there. He claims twice how he will perform a cleansing like the country has never seen before. And let's remember, only around 30 years ago, our country was persecuting, torturing, killing, and exiling people who oppose the government. So talking about cleansing that we have never seen before is very, very scary. This comment is coming from a man who has previously stated that the mistake from dictatorship was torturing, but not killing enough, not finishing the job. This man has majority of votes, and he's just released a video promoting politically based cleansing of the country. Instead of being received with horror, he was granted with cheers of legend, 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 or actually, mito, mito, mito. I'm honestly scared. I know I really sound paranoid, and the worst part, I truly believe I'm not overreacting. In fact, I think we might be underreacting. And
yeah. That's it. Arrasou, arrasou. Foi muito bom. Foi muito bom.
É de rir.
Gente, 9 minutos não foi tão ruim.
Foi ótimo. É uma história de terror.
É uma história
É uma fucking história de terror.
Fine?
Yeah.
There's always something to do. Cool. Everything's fine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Quem que foi?
Não tá tocando a música no ambiente, né? A galera que tá vendo.
Você tá pegando.
Já recebi um comentário aqui dizendo que eu arrasei, tô feliz.
Olha.
Depois, quando a gente for colocar a legenda, a gente tenta sincronizar a música.
É.
A gente sincroniza a música depois, quando
ótimo.
for colocar a legenda. Tra, 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 tra. Tra, tra, tra. Bicha, tra, 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 tra.
Live do live. Liveception.
Nossa, foi mega vacilo ter colocado no
YouTube, né?
Não tem uma tomada por aqui, não, né?
Ai, gente, vontade de dançar um pouco.
Fazer um
Fazer uma festa?
Tem que ter um respiro, né? Porque no meio dessa história aterrorizante tem que.
Ah, eu tenho que ir.
Fala com essas pessoas que se elas quiserem ver no YouTube.
O quê?
Fala para essas pessoas que se elas quiserem ver no YouTube. Tá no meu canal que tem. Ainda eu coloquei no outro canal que eu tenho. One minute. Ainda eu coloquei no canal que eu tenho 25 seguidores só. Eu tava nervosa, não consegui pensar.
Eu já entro, né?
É.
Sim, você quer o timer, né?
Quando ela começar a baixar, ela vai avisar e aí a gente já pode começar a falar.
Vai mudar a luz, a corzinha ali, que aí se tiver vermelha é porque tá gravando já. Você abriu pra gente.
Bicha preta.
Tra, tra, tra. Bicha.
Arrasa.
Tra, tra, tra.
Cool.
Ah, se você quiser ficar de olho também na programação.
Tá.
Pure Resistance with Matheus.
Você consegue pôr ali. E aí você segura.
Aonde?
Ali.
Ah, tô vendo. Calma.
Hello everyone, my name is Matheus. I am a queer artist from Brazil. And this song was from Linda Quebrada. She's a transgender woman from Brazil, and she sings about her pain. I guess, well, keep talking about the terrible times of dictatorship. We can't forget to speak about one important art movement called Dizicroquetes, which is spelled Dzicroquettes, that faced the status quo and became very popular, criticizing the horror and alarming the world about the atrocities that happened in Brazil back then in the 70s. Their aesthetics influenced many people, namely Liza Minnelli, Lady Gaga, and the Queen. They were a theater performative group that burned the boundaries of gender, quoting them, "I'm no woman, I'm no man, I'm a person." Nowadays, we Latin American queers owe our lives to this group because they came to Paris in exile, met Liza Minnelli, and became notorious. They could speak up for the LGBT people that were being executed and persecuted in Brazil. After the end of the dictatorship in 1985, many were the episodes that we LGBT stood up for our rights and remained in vogue in several media. Nonetheless, Brazil, as it's a very Catholic country, suffers a lot from discrimination. Brazil is nowadays the democracy that most kills LGBT people in the world. According to Grupo Gay da Bahia, a world-renowned LGBT institution from Brazil, one LGBT is killed in each 19 hours. Last year, this group raised the information that 445 deaths were registered, 194 gays, 191 transgender, 43 lesbians, 5 bisexuals, and 12 heterosexuals. These heterosexuals were killed due to the fact that they were associated with an LGBT person, a relative or a friend maybe. 100 of them involved guns, fire guns, 111 white weapons, 58 suicides, 32 after they got beaten up to death, 22 for suffocation. There were also some registry of stoning, beheading, and face disfigurement. I come from the countryside myself. There, my friends and I are afraid to express our love in public, albeit we do it anyways as a way of making micropolitics. Being who you ought to be in a country like ours is a matter of transforming a reality. In some cases, it might be beneficial, and it may indeed change a narrow-minded mentality. However, in most of the cases, we become part of that statistics. The ongoing situation for LGBT people is bad, but has always been bad, but is about to go worse. During Lula years, we were shown an opening to our rights. We finally can get married. Brazil is a pioneer regarding AIDS fight. We can adopt, and we were pushing the boundaries of gender binarism each year more and more. We are now afraid of losing everything we conquered throughout time. In the 90s, we had some people in media that were LGBT, but it was something that they were not supposed to talk about. Um, or their homosexuality was a tool of laughter, like some comedians who would have their stereotyped version of how to be a gay or a transvestite. We had important people representing us, though. Two of these were singers that unfortunately died too young of AIDS, and one lesbian singer died of a heart attack in 2001. I grew up hearing their stories, feeling represented, but I knew that we either make people laugh or die young. In our soap operas, they had gay kisses being shot, but they would never show it. When we had our first actual gay kiss, we went to the streets to celebrate. I cried watching it. My eyes would not believe. From these days onwards, we experienced much freedom in the way we could express ourselves, mainly big cities like Rio, Brasilia, São Paulo. São Paulo nowadays holds one of the biggest LGBT parades in the world. Now we have a pop singer called Pablo Vittar, who is the most followed drag queen on Instagram. She has more followers than RuPaul herself. She's making a good pop music and carrying with herself a huge crowd of fans. Also, we have an open gay politician who is a former reality show contestant but fights for Latin American LGBT rights severely, Jean Willis. We own these people a lot because if it were not for them, I myself would not be here. Nevertheless, with good reactions could also come bad actions. In 2010, the most famous homophobic case happened in the largest avenue in São Paulo. Three gay men were victims of some middle class aggressors who hit them with a huge fluorescent light bulb. After that, we had the episode of a transvestite, Dandara dos Santos, who was tortured and beaten to death while she was calling out for her mother's name in a video that went viral in 2017. Uh, it is like that every year. Brazilian media choose homophobic case and make it famous because I know it sounds very shocking than their story, but this is just one of the hundred of cases that an LGBT is beaten up to death. A Brazilian transgender woman life expectation is 37 years old, half of a cisgender one. We in Brazil all know a transgender person who got killed, murdered, beaten up, etc. And this year, this chosen storyline was a close friend of mine. Her name is Matheus Opa, whose name was in the headline of several media echoing around the world. We were born with the same name, but as she had the identity of a non-binary person, she feminized our biblical name. Her existence was artistic. Her living was powerful. We met in the annual art students encounter in the south of Brazil in 2015, and we became close friends. She lived in Rio, and I lived in Brasilia, the capital. She came to visit me in 2016, and I came to visit her in 2017, and also this year during Carnival. A month after that, Mateusa went missing after a party. We all knew that we would never see her again. The police stated that she had entered a favela during the night, and one of the crime organizations took her and burned her alive. Why? We all know the reason. It's also of utmost importance to mention that her body was never found. We could not make a proper funeral. We could not say our goodbyes, even though there were plenty of tears indeed. She had a beautiful soul, as I said. Her presence was artistic and political. She was doing a research about not welcome bodies, as she would say, corpo estranho, or strange body, translated. Her relation with the space as she would exist, coexist, persist, and resist in a city, state, country, and world that were not welcome to people like her, like us. She was black, she was queer, she was my friend, and she was brutally murdered. And I miss her every day.
Nossa, dá pra chorar, né?
A gente vai dar um jeito nisso. A gente vai passar disso e vai sobreviver. Que onde colocar isso?
É, então, não consegui achar um lugar.
Aqui será que não fala, não?
Porque aqui é muito grosso. E se fizer assim, ele fica na vertical. Ele não tá com a...
Ué, mas aqui? Como que eu prendo isso? Não entendo de celulares.
Isso foi.
Opa, eu tirei o volume, sem querer.
Ah, que apertou aqui.
Tá sem volume.
Tá sem volume?
Ah, pera, aqui que eu clico. Não, aqui diminui.
É,
Aqui aumenta.
Ninguém ouviu um soluçar de dor no canto do Brasil.
Mas o enquadramento não fica bom.
Um lamento triste sempre ecoou, desde que o índio guerreiro foi pro cativeiro e de lá cantou.
Tem que subir.
Negro ecoou,
Tem que subir.
um canto de revolta pelos ares, no quilombo dos Palmares, onde se refugiou. Pela quebra das correntes, nada adiantou. Tirando pra não chorar.
Tentando ver onde que eu consigo colocar isso que você vai aparecer.
A minha voz embargou várias vezes.
Mas faz parte, eu acho que isso mostra como esse sério, mostra como isso não é só um programinha de rádio, isso é real, velho, isso é a nossa vida. É a vida de muitas pessoas.
Pra mim, é o mais chocante é a Dandara, sabe?
Nossa, não, velho, tipo...
Vou falar sobre a Dandara.
Hã?
Eu vou falar sobre a Dandara.
Tudo.
A primeira.
Primeira Dandara.
Já sei. Acho que isso aqui. O que eu tenho que fazer?
Ok.
Não, não rolou.
Good night, Vaima. We just listened to Canto das Três Raças, or The Song of Three Races, sang by Clara Nunes. I am Suelen Calonga, student from the MFA Public Art program, and I would like to talk to you about the Black and Indigenous resistance history of our country. I think maybe this quick overview can help you understand that we are walking a long path that can be traced back 500 years, when the Europeans arrived in the territory that today we know as Brazil. I hope it doesn't bother you too much. There's so much important things to say in so little time, but the main message that I would like to address to you is that we have been resisting all sorts of atrocities against our people, from the kidnapping and abduction, murder, rape, forced work, to the attempt to convert or forbid our beliefs and practices, the inequality of access to basic means of life, the denial of a dignified life as human beings deserving of rights, since a long time. For Black and Indigenous resilience, all this did not start now, with all this political mess. And we are here. We are still here, and we are going nowhere, no matter what happens from now on. That said, I would like to talk to you about some history, about our fight and resistance. I prefer to talk to you about the past because our contemporary issues are widespread, so you can Google and easily find about almost anything. Maybe it's more important now to build a background, though shallow yet. Well, in the 1500s, the Europeans arrived and enslaved the people they found in the land, composed of hundreds of different indigenous tribes and cultures. And when they thought there were not enough people, because they fought and died or ran away to the countryside or died of European diseases, they started the transatlantic slave trade from the west coast of the African continent to America. It's estimated that about 12 million people were abducted from Africa to the American continents, and 95% of this total went to Caribbean and South America. Brazil received about 5 million people, 40% of the total, mostly from the west of the African coast. The slave trade was the foundation for the creation and institution of capitalism in Europe, and the accumulation of wealth in the big cities here generated enough revenues for the creation of the first industries in Europe, and kept us right where we are now, with every attempt of thrive being quickly muffled. Decolonization had not only an economical branch, but also a political and a social arm. During the official colonization era, there were a violent contact of all the diversity of African cultures with the indigenous and European cultures in Brazil. To survive on this project based on rape and cultural erasure, the Blacks and indigenous people unite themselves against all differences between them to create ways of organize themselves and fight together when possible. Because the indigenous know very well how to move inside the forest, they made plans of escape from the captivity and hiding, and led the Black people to more safe places where they could found mocambos or quilombos or palanquins, communities of resistance where they could socially settle in the territory and maintain their religious and cultural practices alive. About the quilombos, the most famous quilombo in Brazil was Palmares, an independent, self-sustaining community in the northeast of Brazil, established in about 1600s, with a population of over 30,000 citizens, mostly blacks. The last and most prominent leaders of Palmares were King Zumbi and Queen Dandara. It's said that Zumbi was a noble, descendant of Aqualtune, a princess of the Kingdom of Congo that lost the war against Portugal, which was captured by the king, Portugal captured the king, his two sons, his two nephews, 4 governors, various court officials, 95 title holders, and 400 other nobles who were all put on ships and sold as slaves in the Americas. The date of Zumbi's death, the 20th of November,
is today celebrated as the Black Awareness Day in Brazil. His wife, Dandara, dominated the techniques of capoeira and fought many battles alongside men and women to defend Palmares. Dandara was known as a fighter, but she was also a great ruler and took care of the hunting and agriculture of the Quilombo, and the work with wood, ceramics, and metals, and the production of weapons for war. When captured in a battle, Dandara committed suicide because she refused to serve as a slave again. We are talking about the 17th century. The second largest quilombo of Brazil's history was the Quatirete in the middle east of Brazil and was headed by Teresa de Benguela. Queen Teresa led the political, economical, and administrative structure of the quilombo, maintaining a defense system with guns, traded with white people, or redeemed from the nearby villages. The stolen objects used against the black community were transformed into work instruments because they knew how to work with forge. The Quilombo do Quaritere had also a parliament and a queen councillor. They developed cotton production and owned looms where they produced fabric that was commercialized outside the Quilombo. Under her leadership, the black and indigenous community resisted slavery for over 2 decades. When the Quilombo was destroyed by the military forces and the entire population was killed or arrested. The July 15th is instituted as the Teresa de Benguela National Day and is also celebrated as the Day of Latin American and Caribbean Women. Another remarkable woman of our resistance history is Luisa Maim. Luisa was born in either the Gulf of Benin, West Africa, or Bahia. Her exact place of birth and birth date are uncertain. And she claimed to be of African royalty. Based on her surname, she is assumed to be of the Mai tribe from the Nago, a subgroup of the Yoruba nation who were practitioners of Islam. Luisa Maim is most iconically known to have been involved in many of the slave revolts and uprisings that occurred in Bahia during the early half of the 19th century. She was a key player and a strategist in the Malay Revolt, and she helped to distribute messages in Arabic to others involved. It's not clear whatever happened to Luisa Maim. Some reports say she escaped to Rio de Janeiro, was found and arrested before being deported to Angola, and other tales say that she escaped to Maranhão, where she settled and helped to influence Afro-Brazilian culture there. She said she had at least one son, Luiz Gama, who was a well-renowned poet and abolitionist. These examples of why we used to say that we black Brazilians are noble. We are descendants of African kings and queens. So why enslaved women had such important role in the uprising and the organization of the revolt? Because in the rural areas, their main role were inside the houses of the owners, taking care of the children, being maids of the ladies, or working in the kitchens of the white people or cleaning their houses. So they have useful information from the inside to share with the other blacks when they were allowed to meet in the churches on Sundays, for example. In the cities and small villages, the women were escravas de ganho. That means they were sent to the streets to work as quitandeiras, selling food or working with prostitution, and give their owner the money. Luisa Marim, for instance, was a quitandeira, selling fruits and food on streets while passing information written in Arabic to arrange meetings and uprisings. Just for note, Brazil was the last country in the Western world to abolish slavery, right after Cuba. It was just in 1888, also known as only 130 years ago. Another important role of women in the resistance against the colonization oppressor was in the maintenance of the religion and other cultural practices such as music, capoeira, and medicinal knowledge with phytotherapy that they learned from the indigenous women. The candomblé is a Creole religion that people created in Brazil based on the traditional Yoruba, Fon, and Bantu beliefs brought from West and Central Africa. There is also an Islamic linked sect that came with people from the Muslim traditions in some parts of Africa and were acculturated in Brazil. Candomblé is a polytheistic religion that worship a number of deities called orixás, voduns, or inxis. It depends on which nation came the people from, and its deities are linked or are forces of nature, or actions or characteristics of mankind. So women that were priestesses took an absolutely important role in the survival of the candomblé practice in Brazil, and also the survival of black people. They survived all the slavery period, included the hunt of the witches in the Middle Age, until this day, and a great strategy was keeping the rituals in secret and the syncretism of the candomblé deities with the Catholic saints. There is also contributions of the indigenous deities related to the forest, rivers, and human roles, and another religion with Indian African matrice was created called Umbanda, similar to the Santeria in Cuba. In the case of music, all the culture, the moans about the horrible condition when slaves or even after the abolition, the reivindications and the pride to survive against all odds are very well recorded in our samba legacy. There was a time right after the abolition of institutionalized and slavery that any gathering of black people to play samba or to practice capoeira or even to talk was forbidden in Brazil. It was the law, but we did it anyway. And not only capoeira and samba are today worldwide renowned. There is a capoeira group here in Weimar. I don't know if you know this, but we suffer frequent attempts of cultural appropriations that try to subtract our cultural heritage. None of this will ever shake our presence in this world. Since the beginning of the enslavement in Brazil, black and indigenous women have remained steady in resistance, whether our old black ladies did in the kitchens of white people or by organized resistance in the quilombos. In many cases, the resistance involved more subtle actions than riots, breakouts, and sabotage, including learning to read and write clandestinely, as well as passing on orally the knowledge considered subversive by the owners. So every black and indigenous woman who keeps walking and facing racism and sexism in her daily routine is an icon of strength and celebration of pride. Of course, the backlash is becoming even more harder against our female leadership, as long as we manage to occupy spaces that were not made for us to be part of, like me here at Bauhaus University. How many black South American or Caribbean women were here before me? Earlier this year, we suffered a heavy hit with the murder of Marielle Franco in Rio de Janeiro. Sorry. A black, lesbian, and the most voted city council woman who represented our best chances in the struggle for a society. Oh shit.
It's okay, Hannah.
For a socially more just world through politics since 2015. Marielle was brutally murdered for political reasons. But in the minute they did it, they multiplied the number of Marielles in our country. We stumbled, but we do not fall. We didn't felt then, and will not fall now. Today, we organize ourselves very inspired by the quilombos of the old days in a self-managed way, and with the intersection of gender, class, and racial identity. We are aware that there is no possible struggle through institutional politics because
as Audre Lorde and writer and civil rights activist from the United States once said, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So we'll do it our way, like we always did." Almost. Ai, desculpa ter
Nossa.
estourado pra caramba.
Tá tudo bem. Foi lindo.
Amiga, esse foi uma das coisas mais incríveis que eu presenciei na minha vida.
Gente, vocês, que isso?
Chocante.
A única coisa que eu não acredito é que você esqueceu de falar seu nome.
Eu falei no início.
Falou?
Falou.
Ah, então tá ótimo. Então tá linda. Ai, gente.
Amiga, é só nós por nós. Isso não existe. Depois do fim das eleições, o tanto de pessoas que vão votar em Bolsonaro, as pessoas não aceitam. Elas acham que elas não te amam, né? Elas aceitam. Então,
Elas toleram, né?
elas toleram.
Nem isso mais, né? Então é caminho pra parar de fazer até isso. Caralho, que bosta, né, velho? Velho, como é que pode? Como é que pode a gente estar numa situação assim? O cara tem muito voto, velho. Tem voto pra caralho.
É, mas eu acho que se tem uma coisa que realmente, se a caixa de Pandora já deu, nossa luta também tem que abrir, né? Acho que isso é... Não dá mais pra ficar calado.
Não, mas a gente podia... Não sei.
Gente, o Brasil é um episódio de Black Mirror muito bom.
Não é uma performance eterna. Ai,
A gente tá numa performance de participação daquelas bem constrangedoras.
ai,
Meu,
sim.
como assim, né? Meu,
Uma
aquela
Lídia
coisa...
Pape do mal, sabe? Um pano que
Como é que
machuca todo
funciona,
mundo.
Sara?
O que?
Dá um help aqui, o
Opa,
timing.
não é que tava assim?
Se você tiver como começar e depois...
Tava de frente a câmera?
Agora tá, mas tá perfeito, deixa
Ah,
assim.
então pronto.
Sara,
Oi,
depois...
Aham.
Começa e passa pra cá.
tá. Ai, gente. Esse cara é escroto. Muito escroto. Ai, ai. Dia 28 a gente vai passar junto, né?
Vamos,
Tá,
abraçado.
por favor, enchendo a cara, porque eu não vou.
Fazendo a ciranda.
Senhor, como é que vai lidar
Então
com
a
uma
gente
coisa
passa junto bem alienado, assim, a gente não assiste nada, não sei.
Tipo, as meninas malvadas faz a unha,
Já assisti as branquelas,
as branquelas.
Meu Deus.
aprendi a coreografia.
Sim.
Ah, se é pra aprender a coreografia, eu quero das meninas malvadas também, porque o Natal tá chegando. E aí a gente já se prepara. Apresenta lá no Bauhaus.
Gente, as pessoas não veem.
Hã?
As pessoas não veem.
Eu achava isso, mas as últimas que eu tenho conversado.
Eita, One Minute
Thank
More.
you.
Ela... Caralho, você viu o tempo?
Não, One Minute More de música, não?
Sim, mas a gente tem. Tá bem apertadinha.
Tá.
9 minutos.
É,
Dois.
ele nem tá escutando. Eu vou dar play e você coloca ali perto pra ele ficar de olho, tá?
A gente pede pra cortar a música?
Não, não. Vai começar. Quando
A gente pode pedir ela pra diminuir a música.
30 segundos. Tá tudo bem. Aí a gente pega do... Acho que eles não vão cortar a gente.
Acho que vão, porque a galera já tá esperando. Os próximos que vão entrar.
Tá
Mas
bom.
enfim, vai, Pedro, vai indo. Se ela fizer assim, tipo. Aí a gente.
Não, ele não tá escutando, ele tá com fone. Mas
É.
eu vou passar o timer pra ele.
Well, following this song by this Brazilian band, Francisco Lombre, called Bolsonaro, we're going to talk about a rather shady moment of Brazilian politics right now. And well, there's one main actor, but possibly the worst thing is not really just his main actor, but all the things that are coming out of what we'd rather call Pandora box of it. Well, this actor is Jair Bolsonaro, which is appointed as probably the upcoming Brazilian president in the second term of Brazilian election this Sunday. And well, just for giving some context, coming back a little bit from the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff and starting from some rather polemic remarks by this character, by the impeachment vote of Dilma Rousseff, the Bolsonaro, the front running on Brazilian election, he justified his vote in the memory of Colonel Carlos Alberto Ustra, which have allegedly tortured Dilma Rousseff in the course of Brazilian dictatorship. But there's a few other chapters to bring to this context to this moment right now, which is pretty much the calc that Brazilian passed through. And after the end of Workers' Party government, Michel Temer, then vice president, assumed and tried to press a series of controversial austerity measures, including one of them that freezes public investments in health and education for 20 years and also promotes a series of backlashes in cultural and social programs. With the highest rejection rate ever from a president and regular popular demands from renounce, like popularly claimed Fora Temer, or in English would be Get Out Temer, Michel Temer manages to get to the end of his mandate on the brink of the most controversial Brazilian election ever. A little bit before that, coming back to the year of 2017, like amidst really high violence rates in the whole country, but especially in Rio de Janeiro, there's the approval of a military intervention in the city. Well, amongst the promises of actually getting amongst the promises of diminishing violence, actually the facts came a little bit different in the rise of violence against Black and poor people, with little to no evidence against sexual decrease and general violence in cities. President front-running in elections, Bolsonaro, himself a reform captain, said in recent remark that if granted approval by Congress, he would put the army in the streets in the rest of the country. Come a little bit to the to this upcoming moment and what's going on right now. The elections are shaped by confrontation, polemics, remarks, social media, and violence. This character we're talking about, Bolsonaro, is rising, and there's also the context of uncertainties on the possibility of application of former left-wing President Lula, that over the process was jailed for corruption accusations as was prevented of being a candidate. Without Lula, former Education Ministry and Mayor of São Paulo, Fernando Haddad, assumes his place on Workers' Party candidature and is the strongest center-left candidate. Meanwhile, the extreme right candidate Bolsonaro grows, especially led to strong popular rejection of Lula's and Dilma Rousseff's Workers' Party, that were in power for around 40 years pre-impeachment. Known for its misogynist, homophobic, and racist remarks, Bolsonaro is triggered in the polls after it stabbed in a rally a month before the first term of the elections. The first term of the election, that just happened in the 7th of October, Bolsonaro wins first place with 46% of valid votes, which means almost 15 million votes, with Fernando Haddad on second place with under 30% of valid votes. Polls indicate that for the second term, this Sunday, Bolsonaro is expected to become Brazilian president on the 28th of October, with around 59% of expected valid votes. So let's talk a little bit about Bolsonaro, which might possibly be a name familiar to some of you, and, well, unfortunately, will probably be known to most of you as well in the future, as we have this expectation, unfortunately, that he will actually come to become Brazilian president. Although it's pointed by many enthusiasts as an outsider in politics, this guy has been a congressman for the last 27 years. And actually, in this whole time, he only approved 2 measures. And, well, his supporters are mostly young and most privileged people from 18 to 34 years old. And this candidate had comments in the past that include saying to a female congressman colleague that he wouldn't rape her just because she was too ugly, or even saying that the mistake of Brazilian military dictatorship was torturing and not killing its dissidents, or also saying that he would rather have a son dead in a car accident than a homosexual son, or even saying that women should earn less money than men because they can get pregnant. And this is basically just the beginning. Well, when it comes to this rise of Bolsonaro, the really good point that is also a really strong rise also in resistance. And we had a campaign called Ele Não, which in English would mean not him, which some of you also might have heard, was a really strong campaign that started with a Facebook group called Him, Not Him, and now reached over 4 million followers. And there is a really special thing that only women are granted permission to access this Facebook community. And it also triggered manifestations in most of Brazilian biggest cities. And actually, these manifestations that happened in most of Brazilian cities were actually the biggest manifestations in the history of Brazil, and were also shaped by being specially organized by women and minorities. This campaign that is going on right now, it's also shaped a lot by misinformation. So there's it's widely spread misinformation in social network, and especially WhatsApp, that is used by half of Brazilian population. Also to a campaign like signs that link like we have really potential signs that Donald Trump's campaign political assessor Steve Bannon had developed together with Bolsonaro campaign a Cambridge Analytica allies use of social media as a political weapon, which as a matter of fact is been proved rather efficient when it comes to Bolsonaro in Brazilian case. And also they triggered independent pro-Bolsonaro groups that have been working extensively on the creation of false contents triggered en masse against Brazilian Workers' Party and Fernando Haddad. Also, then when we come to say that possibly the worst thing is not really Bolsonaro himself, although he's pretty fucked up, but probably the worst thing is actually the aftermath and political violence that was triggered from especially his remarks. So just for an example, on the first following days of the first term of the elections, there was a wave of violence in many Brazilian cities. The incidents committed by Bolsonaro supporters include, but are not limited to, the assault of a 19-year-old homosexual woman by 3 men, followed by the use of a knife to draw a swastika in her belly. Or also the physical assault and threat of rape to a female journalist by 2 men wearing a t-shirt with Bolsonaro face. Or even a young man being group beaten by Bolsonaro supporters because he was wearing a red t-shirt, which is the Workers' Party's color. Or a man being aggressed with punches and a glass bottle by over 10 Bolsonaro supporters. Or public manifestations of a group of men in São Paulo alleging Bolsonaro would kill gay people, and a great number of other incidents and threats of violence in the entire country, mostly against homosexual, women, and black people. Latest remarks of self-declared Nazi group pro-Bolsonaro in Brazilian capital, Brasilia, include praising for torture practice of Brazilian dictatorship, such as the torture of militant women assisted by their own sons, remarks that the myths, as its supporters would call Bolsonaro, will make an end to this perversion called LGBT people, and women asked to be raped for using miniskirts, or even cleaning Brazil of communist, LGBT people, indigenous, and people of color. On latest remark as well, Eduardo Bolsonaro, Jair Bolsonaro's son, and also a congressman himself, state that it would only take 2 soldiers to close Brazilian Supreme Court. Politic reviewers state that the approach of the latter is often authoritarian and state by some as fascist and golpist. Some analysts highlight that if elected and under pressure, that could be a high possibility that Bolsonaro could implement a military coup. Eduardo Mourão, that is the candidate to vice president for Bolsonaro, a general himself, had polemic remarks on critics to employment rights, alleging that his white grandson was a handsome guy. Why? Because he could develop the whitening of the race, amongst other stuff. Remarks of Bolsonaro and his government couple, besides indicating a strong presence of external interests in the country, the withdrawal of environment agreements such as Paris Treaty, also indicate the treatment of social movements as terrorist movements, as well as Trump-like comments on fake news by some of the most important media outlets of the country, such as Folha de São Paulo, which also indicates potential threats to press freedom. Well, I guess that we have enough material to get to know that we're in a rather shady moment of our politics and our social life right now. And also, because of that, we could thank their space to Bauhaus FM, first of all, and also like to do an invitation because we're having a conversation in their Latin in Wednesday, November 7th, 7 p.m. So it would be really good to talk about you guys, about it, also after the elections, and also knowing, perhaps talking about things that were already developed in other parts, and we'll be pretty happy to talk about it with you. And also feel free to spread the word and share this program, which will be available on Bauhaus FM website, and also the playlist that we created for the background music. And thank you very much, you guys, for the invitation, and not him, ever.
Tá tocando teto preto.
Tá tocando?
Tá tocando teto preto, minha gente.
Thank
Gente,
you so
olha a
much.
mensagem,
Thank you
olha a
very
mensagem que eu recebi no Grindr.
Ah.
O cara falou assim, I listen to you. Aí eu falei,
Já?
cute. Aí ele, but to be honest, I didn't like it very much. Aí eu, but why? Aí ele, the topic annoyed me.
Meu filho.
Aí eu falei, because it touches your wound. Aí ele falou assim, no, the whole gender thing is just annoying to me. I don't have gender issues.
Ah, vai se fuder. Eu acho que essa fala tem tanto gender issue que ele nem entende.
É muito
Dá
gender
exatamente
issues
isso
pra
pra ele.
Hello.
Como para?
Thank you very
I don't know. Thank you very much and sorry for the delay.
No problem, Sarah.
Ah, sim.